Also, what we'd like to do is mention that there is a 2-day virtual event for those of you that may be interested, that IAN will also have a virtual exhibit there, so you can come and visit us. This is the National Adoption Conference, sponsored by the SELA Center in Los Angeles. So you want to definitely check them out. I think Jennifer will share the link where you can register and how you can visit. But you'll see a lot of presenters there. There's speakers, they have music, they have exhibits, live Q&As. So you definitely want to check them out if you have some time this weekend. We wish them the best of luck in this next 2 days.
Yeah.
Okay, so with all of that, I just want to take this time to go ahead and introduce our special guest tonight. Our spotlight guest is Kevin Hofmann. I'd like to share a little bit about Kevin and who he is. He is an accomplished writer and public speaker who has a passion for adoption and especially transracial adoption, and enjoys sharing his experiences as a biracial, transracial adoptee to help other adoptive families. His book, Growing Up Black and White, has helped many to see what life is like from the viewpoint of the adoptee. He's appearing all over the United States, speaking to parents and professionals with his perspective and light-hearted yet contemplative view is sought after by many. Kevin has been interviewed by NPR and Nightline ABC and is quickly becoming a trusted voice in the adoption arena. He currently lives in Toledo, Ohio, and shares his time with his wife and 2 teenage boys. Kevin also sits on the board of Adopt America Network and also volunteers as a CASA worker for children in the child welfare system. He is also a trainer for the state of Ohio, training foster and adoptive parents, as well as child welfare professionals in the areas of adoption and transracial adoption. Welcome, Kevin Hofmann.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Thank you. We're glad to have you. So this is your first happy hour with us. So we're glad to have you.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah. You may see some familiar faces online tonight, so I'm sure that there's a few here that you know, but yeah, we'd like to dig in and just kind of know a little bit about your backstory. If you would share that with us first, and then maybe we could talk a little bit about your book, Growing Up Black and White, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, gladly. So it was interesting. I was listening to the conversation earlier about This Is Us. And I kind of feel that was us. I was adopted in 1967 in Detroit. I'm the product of an affair between my white mother and black father. They worked together in the Chevy stamping plant, Livonia, Michigan. They were happily married, just to 2 different people. And so my white mother's white husband insisted that she do something with this black child, and that solution was to put me up for adoption. So I was adopted at 3 months old by a white minister, his wife, and their 3 biological children. And we lived in Dearborn, which is a suburb of Detroit, very white suburb of Detroit. And back in the late 60s, it was considered a closed community, which meant people of color were not welcome. And so when I was about 11 months old, after living in this community for 8 or 9 months, we woke up to a cross burning on our front yard. We stayed in that community for 3 years. My father was an associate pastor in St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Dearborn. And they spent those 3 years trying to fire my father because he brought this child of color into their congregation. Finally, at 3 years old, my parents decided this city was going to change us before we change it. And so we moved. And it was probably the best thing my parents could have ever done for me, which was take me from that all-white community that very vocally said, "We don't want you here." We moved into Detroit, where the parsonage, or the home that was owned by the pastor, was in a black neighborhood. So ever since from age 3 to 18, I was always put in touch with people that looked like me. And I think my parents understood they didn't know black culture, so they couldn't teach it to me. And so what they did is they just said, go out and play. And one of the things I didn't mention was I was born 2 weeks after the riots in Detroit. So just an interesting time to live in this city that was really defined by the tension between the two races that I'm made up of. So we lived in that Black neighborhood for 5 years. My dad gets a promotion, and now we move again, but now to still in Detroit, 2 miles away, but to an all-white community. And it's the first time outside my family that I'm a minority. And so that was life-changing, just to kind of try and figure out, where I fit in, who was safe, who wasn't safe. It was interesting. I just went back to that community. I'd been away from that house in Detroit for years. Went back there last summer. And I remember I could go down and I could tell you house by house, which house was safe for this little Black kid and which house wasn't. And I had learned that early. I'd figured that out by age 7 or 8. And so it just became, how I was trying to kind of move through this world as this child of color. And it just meant identifying where was safe and where wasn't. So the convenience store 3 blocks up that I went to once, and the one and only time I went in there, she accused me of stealing. That was not safe. I never went back. There were neighbors like that I was safe with. Thankfully, my best friend that I've known for over 45 years, tall, skinny white kid that lived right across the street from me, that house was safe for me. And we were talking about This Is Us earlier. I remember so much about, the 70s and a lot of what they go through in the series. The first season, especially in This Is Us, I think they got a lot right. And so, just how she was, there's that scene at the pool where, Randall's mom has to approach the Black mother. That rang true for me. Selfishly, there's a lot of similarities, I'll say, between This Is Us and my family. And I'll leave it at that. But yes, her relationship with her mother, my mother and her grandmother were at odds with each other over my adoption. That scene was very familiar to me, that my grandmother had a really hard time accepting me as one of the kids in the family, and actually never did until she was on her deathbed. She had a really hard time with the fact that she had this child of color in her family. And so, it was great time living in that neighborhood and growing up in Detroit, loved every minute of it. And then when I was 18, decided to go to college. And I didn't understand at 17 that the world wasn't like Detroit. And so I just assumed that I could go anywhere and there'd be people that looked like me everywhere. And I found that out the first day I spent on Elma College's campus, a small Presbyterian college in the middle of Michigan, in the middle of cornfields. And it was probably one of the worst decisions I made in my life, which was to go to this school in the middle of nowhere. And it was largely white. There were 1,300 students in the school and 13 of us were Black. And the school had no idea how to handle that, so they didn't. And so I remember being in college and just thinking, this is a 4-year prison term, and I just got to put my time in and get out. And that's what I did. I talk about this term that I coined, and so hopefully this will ring true with a lot of us. I call it adoptee residue. And what I say about that is, that's just the stuff that doesn't wash off. A lot of people, especially in the generation I grew up in, they just assumed, and they told my parents, take him home, don't talk about adoption, and he'll be fine. And I could tell you, I only spent 3 months in care, but that primal wound, the separation between me and my mother has had lifelong effects. And one of the biggest has been, I struggle in relationships. That's the biggest one. And then the second one was that, I can get on this self-destructive nature, which is, man, if I'm right about on the edge of doing something good, man, I will do at times at all costs to, kind of take that away. And so yeah, I was dealing with a lot of that in college when you're at home, away from home for the first time, really struggling with where you fit in. Um, and yeah, the college was just not a good experience for me. And so, and then also part of that adoptee residue too is, I made it, everyone always asked me, well, why didn't you just transfer and go to another school? And that came down to that adoptee residue. And part of that is, and how that shows up in me is, well, I wanted to be the good son. I made a commitment to go to this school, so I'm going to finish it, even if that means it's going to cause me pain. And it was not a good experience. And so that was a tough experience. The book is great because when I wrote the book, that was one of the things I wanted to do, was kind of push through that self-destructive nature. And so the fact that it's out there, and if nobody likes it, that's fine, because it was just me kind of living up to my potential. And so that's what that book means to me. And it's really just a book about our experiences growing up and the crazy things that me and my best friend went through, and, and how I interpreted a lot of that as a child of color. And that has helped, because now it's helped me to expand. Everyone always says or thinks, if you write a book, you're going to be rich. And unless your last name is King, if you're not Stephen King, that really doesn't happen. I mean, you write the book, and really, the book just gives me street cred to go somewhere and speak, and then you can get paid. But yeah, you're not going to make Stephen King money, especially on your first book. But it was a great experience. It was great therapy, and still is for me today, to be able to go out and speak and tell this crazy story. And then people ask me questions, and it allows me to think about what I was going through. And it's been great because I've gotten paid to do therapy, my own therapy. And that's been really helpful. So I went to college, graduated from college. Started the search for my biological mother when I was in college. And back then there was no internet. This was in the 80s, mid 80s. So it was this grueling process of me writing letters back and forth to Lutheran Social Services in Detroit. And the worst thing about that search was when I called my caseworker, Truly Boykin, still remember her name, and I could hear her thumbing through my file on the other end of the phone. And how maddening that was for me, to think this stranger has all the information I want and she can't give it to me. And so that began this 20-year search of me looking for my mother, and then running into a dead end and getting so emotionally exhausted that I had to stop. And then I'd pick it up in a year or two and try it again and run into a dead end. And then 2009, I had just finished the book, and an adoptee friend of mine said, "Hey, have you searched for your biological family?" I gave him the story, and he said, "Here, I'm going to put you in touch with my adoption angel, search angel, someone who connects adoptees with biological family." And that was the first time I had used the internet to search for my mother. And I gave her all my non-identifying information that I'd gotten years before. And I was going out to a high school football game with my sons. And within 20 minutes, she found my mother. The sad thing was, that was 2009. 2003, my mother passed away. But that night, I got a picture of my mother's headstone, her obituary, and the names of my 3 brothers and sister. And so then that started this search for them, which culminated in me having to call my mother's husband and ask him about this affair that his wife had had 40 years ago. And he was kind enough, actually, to put me in touch with my sister, who had been looking for me, which I could not believe. And so Thanksgiving 2009, I met my sister for the first time. I live in Toledo. She lives up in the Detroit area, about 60 miles north of me, but she married a guy from Toledo. And so she was literally coming by my house to go to see her in-laws on Thanksgiving. And that's when I met her. And you adoptees can relate it if you've connected with biological family, seeing someone that has your physical characteristics is pretty powerful. And yeah, Thanksgiving 2009, I got to see where I got my eyes from. I got to see where I got my crooked smile from. Yeah, and got to hear the backstory. You know, I always tell people the three things I wanted to know when I was searching for my mother. Was this. I wanted her to know I was okay. I wanted her to know I didn't hold any resentment for what she did. And I just wanted the real story. And so, yeah, so my sister kind of shared with me what happened. My sister also shared with me that her father was not a very kind man, and it was very tense in their household. So tense that my sister left the house when she was 14 years old. And so that would not have been a good environment for me to be in. You know, this child of color in this white man's home, a constant reminder of how his wife was unfaithful. And so I don't say this for all adoptions, but for mine, the right decision was made, because that would have been a hellish experience in that house. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the story. The beautiful thing is I've been able to use that story and kind of expand it. And so now I do a lot of work with diversity and inclusion, and really just applying the lessons I've learned from kind of growing up in this crazy white household in a black city that's, you know, that was burning when I came out, really.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, and that's the condensed version. I mean, I do a training that goes on for 6 hours, but I won't kill you with that. And you'll see, I mean, if you ask me questions, I'll fill in the blanks. And that's what I really like to do, is just talk. I would rather have conversation than just sit here and talk at you for 60 minutes.
Okay. Well, we're happy to open it up to questions now if you would like to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you've got some an amazing story, and I know we have a lot of questions out there, and I see people shaking their heads. So yeah, you can go ahead and either raise your virtual hand or take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask the first questions. Look at some of the comments.
Can I ask you, Kevin?
Sure.
Was there ever any discussion that your father would take you?
That my biological father would raise me?
No, the man that your mother had the affair with.
Yeah, my biological father.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I missed that.
Yeah. If he would take me, no. I just found out last Christmas. I got in touch with a brother. So my father had 2 children. My biological father had 2 children, a son and a daughter. And it took me forever to find them. It took taking 2 DNA tests with Ancestry and 23andMe, and just connecting the dots. And thankfully one day, last year, I got a call, or I got a message through Ancestry, and this kid thought he was my brother. And he was giving me names that I hadn't recognized, and I was so confused. And he says, so my father's name was Lawrence Nelson, and his father's name was Lawrence Nelson. And we could tell DNA, we were matched, but we couldn't figure it out until then he said, well, my dad's name is Lawrence Nelson Jr. And I went, oh, so he's my nephew. And he had been looking for his father. So my father had this relationship with a woman and disappeared. So did his father. So that generational curse is following that family. And so while he was looking for his father, he finds his father, thinks I'm connected, puts me in touch then with my brother. And last Christmas, I'd gotten his phone number and I called him. And if you've ever searched, one of the most frustrating things you have to do is you have to give a whole lot of information at once to people when you're looking for someone, so they don't think you're crazy. And so I called him and I was like, okay, my name is Kevin Hofmann. I think we're related. My father's nickname was Pee Wee. He worked at the Chevy stamping plant in Livonia, Michigan in the late 60s. And he had this affair with this white woman. Do you know anything about that? And I leave him a message, and then 5-10 minutes later, he calls me back, and I'm too nervous to answer it. So I let it go to voicemail. And then and it's just so funny to me. So he's 20 years older than me, old black guy, and just old school black guy where so he leaves a message and all his message says is, Hofmann, yeah, it's your brother. Yeah, all that stuff you got, it's right. Call me. And I just thought, and when I called him, he kept everything so close to his chest. I would ask him questions and I would so our sister, I said, and I knew a lot of the answers to these questions. I said, so do you have any siblings? And he said, yeah, I have a sister. She's getting along really well. She's 4 years older than me. She's 74, still lives in Detroit, right near me. And they live really close to where I used to live in Detroit. And, but he wouldn't give me her name. He would not give me her name. And I just said, hey, I would love to talk to her. If you could just pass along my information, that would be great. Because I'm thinking maybe the sister is the soft side and I can get something from her. But now I don't know if he passed it on or not. I mean, I never heard from her. I texted him a couple times and just said, hey, have you talked to our sister? But I haven't heard back, which is kind of unfortunate because I would like to, I think as an adoptee, we all want if you ever seen the movie Antoine Fisher, we all want the big, spread out table with the food and the family welcoming you in. And just, unfortunately, that didn't happen for me. So I don't think he knew about me, my biological father. He didn't. My brother told me he didn't. None of them knew about me. And back in the 60s, the husbands weren't really, or the fathers didn't have a whole lot of rights. So she just went to the hospital and actually her husband had come up with this, my biological mother's husband had come up with the story, which a lot of women did at that time, which was just to say that they were raped. So he had said, yeah, she was raped by an unknown black guy. So he had no idea I was around. And interestingly, he died within 2 weeks of my mother.
Okay, I have to say this out loud. What?
Yeah, and as far as I know, I don't know if they ever had any contact after that. I know I found out he had moved to Chicago, probably, in the early 70s, and I don't think they kept in contact. But yeah, when I eventually did search for him, and found out that they died within 2 weeks of each other, and probably didn't even know it.
All righty, next question. Tina, you were questioning about the sibling relationships. Do you want to take yourself off mute? Tina?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So yes, I was just wondering about how that's evolved for you with, you're saying you've been connected with some of the siblings, but not all of them, and kind of where you're at with those relationships.
So I've connected with my mother's side of the family first, met the sister on Thanksgiving, then met another. So we have, that's so hard to say sometimes. Mm-hmm. We have 3 brothers. Yeah, I have 3 brothers and a sister in that family. 2 of the brothers did not want to meet me. 1 did. My sister did. I met a niece. I met an aunt and uncle. I met the aunt that my mother went to borrow money to get my abortion.
Wow.
And the aunt gave her the money. And my mother had left her mobile home with the money to travel up. They were, in Detroit. She was going to travel to Flint, Michigan to have an abortion. And somewhere along that road between Detroit and Flint, she changed her mind and decided to go home and tell her white husband she was pregnant with the black guy's son or child. So I've been in touch with a brother and a sister, niece. 2 brothers didn't want to meet. And then everybody started to hear about this crazy story that most of them didn't even know about. And so I was getting inundated in Facebook by all these relatives, and I couldn't tell you who they were. And I kind of felt like they all wanted to see the product of this kind of shady affair that their grandmother or their aunt or their sister had. And so early on, I started to feel kind of like a zoo animal, that everyone was just coming to see kind of the juiciness. Like, they didn't know their grandmother like that. So it was just so crazy that she could have this affair, and that there was a child out there that nobody knew about. And so one of the best decisions I've ever made as an adoptee was to say, now that I'm an adult, I get to handle who comes and goes as far as relationships. And so there were people, and I let my sister go for my health. I stay in touch with a niece. She's kind of the hub of the family, so I can find out what's going on with everybody that way. But it just wasn't healthy for me to be in connection with that. And I didn't need it. That's what a lot of people don't understand, is for a lot of us adoptees, just meeting and getting answers is enough. I don't need to have these lifelong relationships with people, because we come from our lives are so different. Yeah, that it's just hard to maintain. And that's the one thing I say about those, reunion shows on TV. You always get these great reunions, everyone's crying. And I would just challenge someone to follow those relationships. No one tells us how to maintain those relationships.
Right.
And those are hard, especially if you're adults and coming from different areas. And so I don't really have a whole lot of connection with the family. But here's the cool thing, and holidays are great for me with this family. So last Christmas, I go to the mailbox and there's a card. And my wife loves Christmas cards, and I'm thinking, it's 2020. Why are people still sending Christmas cards? But so I open it up, and it's from an address I don't even recognize. And when I'd met everybody, this was 9-10 years ago, I met the family. I had one conversation with an Uncle Harold, my mother's brother. And so I go out to the mailbox last Christmas, get the card, and it's a Christmas card. And I open it up, and there's a check that falls out for $5,000 from my Uncle Harold that I've only talked to once in my life.
Wow.
And then I called the family. I called Stephanie, my niece. And I just said, so tell me about Uncle Harold, because I'm trying to figure out who else got a check and what is this about. But I didn't want to just come out and say I got a check, because I didn't know how they were going to take that. So I just said, tell me about Uncle Harold. And she said, oh, he's my favorite uncle. He used to live in the Detroit area. He now lives in California. And she said, when he was here, every time I would go over to his house as a little kid, and he would always tell me to go find the orange cat. And she said, I didn't figure it out till last year. He didn't even have a cat. And I thought that was a great story to kind of tell me his personality, and kind of use this jokester. And so then I just said, did you get a card from Uncle Harold? She's like, no. I was like, okay, well, if you talk to my sister, when she gets the card from Uncle Harold, have her call me. And she never did. But the good thing was I got Uncle Harold's number from Stephanie. And so I call him, and I just said, man, I got to tell you, I really appreciate this. And unfortunately, sometimes when men talk, we don't want to go too deep emotionally, and he didn't. And I really wanted him to know how important that was to me. And hopefully he heard it. I don't know if he did. And he had just explained, he said, let me tell you why I did that. And he said, my wife died a year ago. We went through her estate, settled that. And I thought, I want to settle my estate before I die. And so I want to give money to my kids and my nieces and nephew. And that was it. And he said, so that's why I sent you the money. And I thought, man. And I just said, I really hope you hear this, but more than the money, it was the fact that you put me part of that family when you didn't have to, and I would have never known. And most are gonna, if they find out about it, might come at you for that. And I really appreciate you considering me part of the family, because we don't always get that.
Right.
So that was a really cool thing that he did.
Can I ask a question, Kevin?
Sure.
I'm looking forward to reading your book. I'm sorry I haven't done that yet.
Tell
And
Betsy I said hi.
yes,
Betsy
I will.
Norris.
Yeah, Betsy, I will. And then we might be in a couple of adoption groups too. Like, I'm seeing your name around. So,
Yeah, you look really familiar.
oh, thank you. Uh, so I wanted to ask this because when one is biracial, there's the tendency for for a variety of reasons to have to pick
Yeah.
what you are and which side you're going to be on. So given that, especially when you talked about college, did you ever how did you reconcile like who you were going to be in the world based upon from your college experiences up to now?
Yes, so this is really interesting, and I always talk about this. Context is so important. So I grew up late 60s in Detroit, and in Detroit, you were Black or you were white, and there was no in between. So I remember I played baseball. My mom always thought we had to always be doing something active. And I was horrible at baseball, but she made me play. And so I was on this baseball team, and it was, me and a couple other Black guys on the team. And then there was another kid who was from the Philippines. And I remember us calling him over and saying, Gilbert, come here. Okay, if anybody asks you, you're Black, you're part of us. And that sounds crazy, but that's how Detroit was. It was Black or white. And to this day, there are very few diverse neighborhoods in Detroit. It'll be all Black street, butted up against an all white street, but very rarely do they. So that's part of Detroit's kind of history. So I had learned early on that I had to choose. For my social survival, I had to choose a side, and I knew I would never pass for white. And so I did. And actually, I talk about this, how important it was for me to find my tribe or my clan. And right away in that Black neighborhood at 3 years old, when another kid across the street, Derek Herbert, when I came into that neighborhood, he put his arm around me and told everybody, you won't mess with him. And those kids became like superheroes to me, to the point where I felt bad for my white brothers and sisters because they weren't Black. And so that's interesting, because then I, start doing this work in the adoption industry, and I start reading, and I understand that that's part of the kind of rub between transracial adoption and the Black community, which is the Black community is fearful that you're taking their children out of the community and you're not raising them to be these confident children of color. And I thought, man, I thought my brothers and sisters got the short end of the stick because they weren't Black. So I thought, yeah, that's a pretty healthy racial identity. And so I've identified as Black, one, because I didn't even know I was biracial till I was 20, till I got that non-identifying information. And so I identify as Black, and man, does that really upset some who identify as biracial. But again, context is important. And I knew that I wasn't going to be seen as white, and there was no biracial community where I was coming up. And so, yeah, every year I identify more biracial, but it's still, it's been so long. I've just always identified as Black. And I tell transracial, biracial doesn't come up as much as it does when I'm training. If I'm training a group of transracial parents, everyone always has to tell me, you're my biracial child. And I tell them that, I say, I don't say that. I just, I'll say I'm Black, and so it's just interesting. I think for some, that kind of softens the blow in a strange sense. But I know, like, the hierarchy in adoption for kids is like little white girl, little white boy, black boy, black girl. And so, especially if you're talking full African-American child, they are seen way down, in the hierarchy. And I think for some, it makes them feel better because their kid gets to go up a couple notches if they're seen as biracial. And so yeah, I don't, again, it's evolving, which is cool. But I fell in love with so much with Black culture and in the Black community. And that was just my place to really kind of exhale. I knew I could go to those Black kids and I could tell them, yeah, I got treated horribly by this lady because I'm Black. And when you're hurting, all you want is someone to just hear you. And so I didn't want to go to those. I didn't want to debate whether I got that right or I saw it wrong or I was always playing a race card. I just wanted someone to hear me. And so, yeah, my Black friends would just go, yeah, you're right. Let's go play some basketball. And that's all I needed. And so, yeah, it was great to grow up the way I did, which I don't see a lot of transracial adoptees who have that experience to constantly be in touch with where they come from. The greatest gift my parents gave me was moving into that Black neighborhood.
Wow, Kevin, thank you for saying it in that way, especially just having the space to be able to just speak whatever it is without having to put a bunch of conditions and parameters and all the explaining about it. I mean, it's a lot of energy to do that. And then to get that blowback, when all you want, especially when you're a young kid, is to just say, do you see me? Do you just see me and what I've experienced?
Yeah.
And just hold me and comfort me, love me.
Yeah. And I was so fortunate that even when I moved into the white neighborhood, and I always joke about this and say, Detroit white is just different just because of the history and that you're in such close proximity with people unlike you. And so my best friend across the street, I remember thinking when we were about 8 or 10, thinking, man, this kid is my best friend, but we've never talked about the fact that my skin color is different. And if I can't bring my whole self to this relationship, then I'm going to be really hurting. And so I remember really thinking long and hard about that, and then getting the courage to go to my white friend and saying something similar. Man, Mrs. Matt's down the street, the woman that hates everybody, I think she hates me even more because I'm Black. And my best friend, Mike, just said, yeah, man, I think you're right. And we've been friends for over 45 years because of that. Now to the point where we'll go out. We were just at dinner. We were at a Bob Evans not too long ago. And he got there before I did, and he was eating, and this waitress was great to him and loved on him. And then I came and the waitress disappeared. And it was obvious what was going on. And when we finished breakfast, Mike said, I'm gonna pay, you go out to the car, I'll meet you there. And when I went to the car, he let that waitress have it. So yeah, it's been a cool experience. But yeah, when I was hurting, I just needed, and actually, I did a lot of, Mike and I have done a lot of work. Mike, that's my best friend. We had done a lot of work in diversity and inclusion. We'll go into schools and help them with that. And one of the exercises he wanted me to do before we started working together was, he had asked me, I'm gonna give you the 5 whys. And it's this exercise. It's really obnoxious, but it actually is very helpful. So he said, I'm going to ask you why 5 times. And so he said, why'd you write the book? And I said, I wrote the book because I wanted to give a pathway to white parents that have adopted children of color because we didn't have one coming up. And he said, well, why did you do that? And he asked that 4 more times. And then the last answer to the last why was, I really wrote the book because I simply wanted to be heard as a person of color and as an adoptee. And so I purposely went into the book, writing it in a way where I could talk about race in between these crazy stories of me and Mike doing stupid stuff that little boys do. And then I could say, and this is how I interpreted that as a child of color. And my hope was that maybe that would help us kind of find some reconciliation, between the races that I'm made up of. And so, yeah, it's been this great experience, and it's an ever evolving experience that I just enjoy being a part of.
Great, thank you. We've got a lot of questions coming in, Kevin, so I'm going to go ahead and move this along a little bit. Our next question comes from Nancy. Nancy, I think you posted 2 questions in the chat room. You want to take yourself off mute?
I forgot my first question, but my second was, if I got this right, Kevin, you said you were raised with 3 white siblings that were naturally born to your adoptive family, right?
Yes. Yes.
So what was it like for them to grow up in a Black community when you made the move?
Yeah, and so it was not the perfect experience for them. So my mom always says that was the biggest challenge for her, was we couldn't find a community where everyone felt welcome.
Yeah.
And so when we lived in a Black community, I remember often my brothers would get chased home by the Black kids in the neighborhood. And it's just this horrible thing about human nature that we kind of seized on the minority. And so when they were the minority, they got picked on. My sister didn't get picked on. And I think she was older. So she was 5 years older than us. And she was a woman or a girl at that point. And I also think my sister was just more comfortable in that environment. And you can easily spot that. And oftentimes when you walk into an environment or a culture and you seem obviously uncomfortable, people will seize on that as well. So I think that happened with my brothers. So the unfortunate thing is that I'm close to my mother. My father has passed away. I'm close to my sister. But my brothers, I think they just hold a lot of resentment for the fact that I think they feel like they grew up as the invisible children. Yeah. That there was a lot of concessions made for this little Black kid. And no one was really looking out for, no one was celebrating our culture. And I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I don't think
it's a hard,
my parents,
decision.
yeah, my parents made the mistake of looking at it like we're this white family that just happened to adopt a child of color but these terms weren't around then, but it would have been better to see it as we are now this multicultural family, which means we have to celebrate all cultures. Mm-hmm. And I think if we would have, and it was crazy because my dad's mom was an immigrant from Germany who had this thick German accent. So we had this rich history, this German history that we didn't celebrate and we should have. So I kind of get why they're resentful.
Did everyone stay around the same area as adults, or did they end up leaving and going to different places?
No, my oldest brother moved down to Atlanta. My other brother's out in California, but me, my mom, and my sister are within 45 minutes of each other.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Next up, we have Jennifer. Jennifer Ghostin.
Hi, everybody. Kevin, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. It's always good to hear from male adoptees. I'm telling you, it's just like, I'm just always thrilled to see you all show up.
And we grow up.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to know if I heard you correctly when you said your maternal side was told that your birth mother had been raped by a Black man instead of the truth of an affair.
I don't know who got that story, but so here, I didn't tell this, but so when I was searching for my mother, okay, I found out my mother passed away. So I got a copy of her death certificate and sent it to Lutheran Social Services in Detroit and said, here, she's dead, give me my information. And they give me 1 page fax to me, and that 1 page said that she was raped by an unknown Black man. And I'm freaking out at this point when I read that, because 20 years before, the page you sent me told me that she was in a relationship with a Black man. So what is it? So I called the agency and I'm like, and I'm freaking out at this point because I had 20 years to come up with every possible scenario as to what might have happened. And I didn't have that one on the list. And so I was pretty shook by that. And then I called the agency and they said, oh, we got to send you the other page. And the other page went on to say her husband had come up with that story because of the shame that was attached to the fact that this white woman was pregnant by a black man. So it was actually, I remember calling someone at the county, Wayne County in Detroit, about this. And man, God bless this woman. I don't know who she was, but I was freaking out a little bit about this story. And she said, look, that was very common back in the late 60s when white women got pregnant. That was the line that was used because it was such a shameful thing. But yeah, so that, yeah, the worst page you could have faxed me is the page that she faxed me. But I don't know who outside of, that's the story that they had given to the adoption agency. But when they started asking them questions, that was what was also in the second page, was when they started asking them more detailed questions about what was going on, it was easily seen that they were lying, and that they finally came out and said, no, it was the guy she worked with.
Okay.
But I don't know if the family got that story. I doubt it, because yeah, it's funny when you get in a reunion with people then want to just kind of fill in the blanks, and unfortunately with lies. So my Aunt Nancy told me, well, we wish we would have known because we would have adopted you. And I'm thinking, no, you wouldn't have. But I just said, oh, bless your heart. So I don't, but it was obvious they didn't keep they weren't that in touch with each other, because her story was, I didn't even know, like no one knew when my birth date. So if I hadn't found them, they never would have found me.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for having Kevin.
You're welcome.
Good, okay.
Excited to have him here. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, our next question comes from Andrew. I saw you had a question in the chat bar.
I did. Hi, everybody. Kevin, it's good to see other guys here. And I always like to know if others have struggled with the masculine training that we've endured in coming to terms with the primal wound. I don't know what your culture was like in Detroit. I grew up basically as a hillbilly. I'm Latino and grew up in a basically New Jersey hillbilly. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the man training made it hard for me to work through some of this stuff. So I'd just like to hear if you had any similar struggles.
I did, and I've become very good at shutting that off. And so, yeah, I think we all are products of that. But I've also learned too, that I'm a very empathetic person. So when I hear a story, it just weighs on me. Like, yeah, there's some movies I can't watch just because they're not over when the movie ends for me. It kind of just attaches itself to me. So I've learned as I've gotten older, I am this actually very like this feeling empathetic person, not just for myself, but for other people especially. And so that plays a lesser role in my life now. And actually I get kind of frustrated. Like I said, like when I call my brother and he doesn't give me any emotion. And I'm like, how can you not feel this? So now that I know how I am, I don't fight that anymore. I'm just like, oh, that's just how you are, which has been a great growing process for me too. And that was another one of them stupid exercises Mike had me doing when we were working together, which take one of those personality tests, which actually helped.
Great, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Rich, you're up next. Rich Erlob.
Hey, Kevin. Good to finally talk to you in person. I've seen your name around, and I think we might have chatted a bit a few years ago, but I really appreciate your story and your spirit and all the good you're doing. My question is, what made you decide to choose a career in child welfare and the realm of adoption? And what kind of I don't know what the right question is. What kind of barriers or resentments or anxieties did you have to work through in order to do that effectively?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I used to be, I am no longer, CASA worker. So I worked, so my job was, when the kids get removed from the homes, I would come in and I was the voice for the child. So I would be the advocate for the child. And so often you'd go in, you'd meet the parents, and then you'd see the kid, you'd go visit the kid in the foster homes. I did that for, I don't know, 3-4 years. And it was just so hard. It just, that old saying, not for the grace of God, there go I. I was working with children who very well could have been me. And they were working through some very serious issues, which was triggering all this stuff in me. I continued as a CASA, like I said, for 3 or 4 years. Then I got a job as a recruiter for the Dave Thomas Foundation. So I would go into child welfare agencies. We would mine files, trying to find families that were related by blood to the kids, to match the kids and get them adopted. And that, I did that for a year. And I remember the last meeting I had at the agency, I presented the agency with this young white girl, and I found a mother for her out east somewhere. And this girl was like 13 or 14. And I present the child to the agency, and the response I get back from the adoption worker was, well, we don't even try to match teenagers. We do the younger kids. We just kind of figure teenagers are a lost cause. And that was the last meeting I ever went. That was it. And soon after that, I went back to being an insurance adjuster, because that system just seemed so broken. And it was, so much was being done that was just, kids would go to therapy really just to look at the therapist for an hour because nobody was talking and the therapist didn't really care. And so it just seemed like such a waste of resources. And it was triggering so much in me that I just decided I'm better kind of on the outside. So I get to go in and, do training, much needed training for adoptive parents and foster kids. But to be in there trying to place kids was just it's too overwhelming, just too much. And not healthy. And again, and I'd gotten to the point in my life where I was just like, you know what? How about I look out for me and do what's going to be healthy for me? And so I got out.
Thank you. I respect that, and I understand the emotional bandwidth issue.
Man. Yeah, the great thing is, one of the CASA kids that I met was this young girl from Liberia, Africa, who had been rehomed. So she had been adopted, and then her parents, this was a big practice a couple of years ago. The parents would go online into these chat groups and find people who they could sign over a power of attorney that would take their problem adoptees. And this had happened to this young lady, not once, but twice. And then finally, she was so angry, she punched a foster father, and the police were called in and she was put in foster care. And I met her when she was 16, and just, man, so angry and so just upset. And now she's like a daughter to me and my wife. She aged out of foster care, didn't have much help. I got to see that it's nearly impossible for an 18-year-old to make it on their own. And she found the Army, man, and it saved her life, quite honestly. And now she jumps out of planes and fuels big trucks and tanks, and and she's one of those success stories. So that was the greatest thing that came out of that. But it wasn't hard being nice to her, man. They accused me of so much, and we were just trying to kind of minister to this young girl. And that was the other reason why it turned me off from that too.
God, that makes me so mad to hear that. For people giving up on a kid for any reason. It's like, because at some level we were given up on
Yeah.
to start with, right?
Okay. Right.
So we plow through life trying to, overcome that. And then to have to go through it in any type of scenario after that is difficult. I mean, I'm like the fact that we're all here, coherent,
Yeah.
looking rather decently in the square box is great. Because otherwise, we really could have been off the rails.
And one of the things I tell her, who, man, she started out, the story is she was this 5-year-old walking barefoot through the streets of Liberia. And that's how they found her. And I told her, what you have gone through in the first 5 years of your life, most adults will never go through. And I thought, man, isn't that the story of so many of us adoptees? That early on in life, man, a lot of us went through some stuff. But the fact that we're here, we're still standing, man, you got a leg up on a lot of people because you've been through so much that puts so much in you that really, and I've seen it in her, she'll run through brick walls. And it's just because, there's this great book out there, Paul Tuff is the author, and it's about what makes kids successful. And he says a big part of that is the grit that you get from going through some of life's experiences. And I thought, man, a lot of us adoptees have that grit. That, man, we've been through stuff that most adults will never see, and we're still here. And that means, man, take pride in that, because yeah, we're still standing. That the resilience that a lot of us have is pretty impressive.
Okay, thank you. Marcie Hawkins, she has raised her hand.
But there it went.
Hi, Marcie.
Hi, Marcie. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Kevin. First and foremost, thank you so much for sharing your story and making me laugh.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, something tells me we might share, that little twisted humor.
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to when you finally find your relatives and they come out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
Especially on my biological father's side, they're all like, oh, you must come back to the bosom of the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And especially to the point where my 103-year-old great aunt announced and wanted to know when I was moving back to the United States.
Mm.
I didn't have the heart to tell her that Alaska's been a state since.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness.
And it was a hard choice to say, Indiana, you don't have mountains.
Yeah.
Because of that. And I think a lot of people experience that is you're going, I'm so happy to find all these people who accept me, who want me. No, I don't want to move.
Yeah.
I'm just acclimated to where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I do have a bonded, all those other words too. You wind up, you're going bonded, heart, psychological, legal, because I have a sister from my adopted family. Yeah. And then you go biological, paternal, biological, maternal. And at the end of the day, your just brain is exploding.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to identify who everything is.
Yeah.
I also, a small point was you were talking about identifying as biracial, and my husband is biracial, was biracial, and that was something that when the census came out, I was kind of joking, but I said, okay, which little thing do you want me to put down here, black or white? And he's just kind of looking at me like, huh?
Yeah.
And finally get it out of him, black. Yes,
Yeah.
I think so, because his mama is Lily. Yeah, she's a Lily. And he never really met his dad. So I feel bad for him because he didn't have that camaraderie with other, children, of darker skin colors.
Yeah.
And it just, we used to joke with him and tell him he was the whitest black man we'd ever met.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. And once again, thank you. I've enjoyed this immensely.
All right. Thank you.
Good to see you again, Marcie. Thanks for coming back on. Okay, Nancy, Yes, you had another question. That's a good one. Nancy?
Yeah. So, Marcie, you're gonna have to remember.
I'll help you out here.
To all of these great questions.
You got some great
What did
questions.
I ask?
I'll help you out, okay?
Thank you.
In your work, when and how
Oh,
do you
yeah.
recommend parents tell their children they were relinquished and adopted?
Yeah, thank you.
Ask, yeah.
So I
Ask from a
think that-
woman who didn't find out until she accidentally found out at 37.
At what age?
37.
Yeah, see that just inspires me that we should be doing it early and often.
Yes.
Because if you don't, Uncle Joe will tell your kid at Thanksgiving, so how about you just man up and do it? So, and I always tell, adoptive parents when I talk to them, I know that you will handle the topics of race and adoption right, as if when I go to your child when they're a teenager and I say, so when did your mom and dad tell you were adopted, or talk about race with you? And if they say, I can't remember, we've always talked about it, then you got it right. I think a lot of people want me to say, okay, on their 5th birthday, sit them down and tell them that they were adopted. Yeah, I think it should just always be in part of the conversation from the get-go.
I was adopted in the 50s, and the theory then was to not tell until much
Exactly.
older, when they could understand that they were adopted. And I get that, but yeah, there was never the right time, and so it ended up being.
Yeah, that's the thing too. And my parents did that too. We didn't talk about adoption or race in my house.
Yeah.
And so I think, similar generation I grew up in, and they were told, just go home and don't talk about it, as if it never happened, which is harder to do with a transracial family because we don't look alike.
Right.
So I always knew. So I had that advantage of you couldn't keep it from me. I always knew because I didn't match my brothers and sisters. But yeah, I think, we do a disservice to kids. And like I said, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard from adoptees that it was the wrong person in the family that told them the deep, dark secret.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It was the opposite for me because I looked like my family. And so I was more devastated because I couldn't believe that it was really true. And it was a friend that told me from outside the family. So the disbelief was the hard part to get over.
Yeah, I mean, everything you were taught, I'm sure, man, that would be.
It's your identity.
Yeah. And then what do you do? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yep. Thanks, Marcie, for the tip.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see. Oliver, you're next.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Oliver.
Really appreciative of you being here. I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. Later on, eventually in my career, I moved up to the Detroit area, and I was really shocked on how segregated Detroit is.
Yeah.
I mean, coming from the South, it just
That's been a lot.
yeah, one of my first weekends up in Detroit, I just drove down the road that just goes along the river.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it just shocked me to go from $1 million houses straight into inner city Detroit.
Yeah, like one street over.
Yeah, one street over, seriously.
Yeah.
So my question was, you said you grew up in a faith community, I assume, since your father was with the church. How much did that impact your journey dealing with race and adoption? Did it?
Oh, it was always there, but and so my dad is a Lutheran minister, or was, and so it was interesting. So I had grown up as a Lutheran and then got married a Black woman, and then went to a non-denominational church, and the differences in those churches and those lifestyles was just amazing to me. And it just seemed like, in the Lutheran church, it was kind of like this club we just went to on Sundays. And then we forgot everything we learned. And then we just went back to be reminded of it the next Sunday. when I went to church with my wife, it was a lifestyle. It was, no, you're a Christian and you just live the life as a Christian. So I think growing up, it didn't have that big of an impact on me because that was, again, we didn't talk about this stuff. So we just go to church. My dad would get up there and preach, and then we go home. And so I was thankful that that was my foundation, and then I was able to build on that as I got older, and it became more of an impact as I got older. Yeah, what I didn't share with you is that that church didn't want us there. And so they wanted to fire my father, and it was interesting. So I had written this book. It's in the second edition now. The first edition, I didn't put many names in it. And then after 10 years, it would have been out for 10 years. I said, I'm naming people. So I went in there and named St. Paul Lutheran Church in Dearborn. And then I went to the church, and I wanted to do this for my father because he had so much pain and anguish from the time he was there. Yeah, I mean, they brought the bishop in to fire him, and it was just this big mess. And it was only because I was part of the family. And so I go to the church, and I walk into the office, and there's 3 white women sitting at the desk folding the bulletins for the service on Sunday coming up. And 2 of them looked up, looked dead at me, and then went right back to what they were doing. And I was like, oh my God, 30 years later, we haven't changed. So I dropped off a copy of the book and folded over the chapter that had talked about this experience we had with the church. And then that was probably 10 years ago. I hadn't heard anything. And then my sister calls and she says, yeah, I was on their website. Did you see? And they have this, it's the 150th year anniversary. And it has all the pastors listed that were ever a part of the church. And I didn't see my dad's name on there. So then I called the church and I said, you know, I would really hope that you would include my father in the experience that we had going, you know, as part of the community there. And the pastor called me and she was like, man, I've been meaning to call you. We'd like to sit down with you and try and reconcile this. So last Sunday, we had a FaceTime meeting just like this with the church. And my mom got to say her piece and I'll say how much they hurt her during that time. Because yeah, they would refer to me as like the snotty-nosed black kid in the nursery, or the white women would always come up to my mom and ask her, well, who's he gonna marry? Or who's he gonna date? And I was like, I'm younger than 3, but they were just scared to death that this 3-year-old savage was gonna grow up and date their daughter. And so, yeah, so we got to talk to the new pastor, and there were people on that Zoom call last Sunday that were in the church while we were going there. And that was crazy to see. And I'm sitting there looking at everybody going, I wonder which side you were on, because it split the church. Part of the church was okay with me being there, and part of the church just fought it tooth and nail. So it's been a big part of my life, a great foundation, and I've been able to build on that, definitely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. Okay, Morgan, would you please take yourself off mute?
Hi, Kevin. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, I'm going to stop my video just because my connection is not great and that might help. Hold on. Kevin, I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story. And I have so many questions. The one that that I put in the chat was there a story that you were told about why your adoptive parents adopted you? That was the messaging around why you were adopted?
My wife loves to tell this story. When I met my wife when I was 21, 22. And I always had fun with the fact that I was this black kid that was raised by white people. So I would always joke about it, especially when I started dating. I would say something stupid like, you know, I'm a minority in my own family. And I told one girl I was dating, she lived a street over from me in that white neighborhood, but it was a black girl had moved in. And so I started dating her and told her that, and she thought I was joking. And then she came to our front door and my mom answered it. And she about fell over when this white woman answered the door. But yeah, so when I started dating my wife at 20, she asked me, why did your parents adopt you? They already had 3 biological children. And I said, I don't know. Because I grew up in a time, it was pre-Dr. Phil and pre-Oprah. We weren't talking about stuff that deep. And so the first time my wife, we were dating at that time, the first time she met my parents, she asked. And I was like, ooh, I want to hear this. And my mom just said, our plan was always to have 4 kids. I have a brother that's 10 months older than me. She said his pregnancy was just physically hard on my mother. And so they still wanted to complete their family with 4 kids. And so they decided to adopt. But back in the late 60s, since my mother was actually physically able to have children, they only qualified for medically fragile children or hard to place kids. And back then, and still some areas today, biracial or children of color are considered hard to place. And so, yeah, I got on the list because I was a hard to place child. And it was funny when my mother and father went to just see if I was ready for adoption or available to be adopted. The director had no idea. So she calls the foster mother. And the foster mother, I was 3 months old and hadn't been seen by a doctor. And that's what they wanted to know was when was his last doctor visit? And the agency turned to my mother and father and said, well, he hasn't been seen by the doctor since he was born. Let's do this. Take him home. If he works out, just keep him. And so they did. And so my dad says that he wrote the check for $275 and they never returned me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Morgan. Okay. Phil, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Kevin, really inspired by your story and just your storytelling. I really enjoyed hearing from you tonight. And inspired by how you've kind of moved on from your birth family challenges and just such a mature attitude, I guess, or what's the key like for you as far as healing, dealing with resentment and those sort of things? Anything you could pass along?
I guess one of the biggest things for me was just identifying things that I'm susceptible to. And so it's interesting, so adoption affects me the most in relationships, and not just, so that can be peer relationships. It could be when I was dating. It was with my wife. It's with my kids. It affects me in all those areas. And it's simple for me because, and this makes so much sense to me when I say it, and when I said it the first time, which was, my mother, who carried me for 9 months, gave me away. And for us to think that there was no connection between us two is, one, it's not factual and it's not based on science. There is connection and bond that happen between a child and their mother while you're in their womb. So to understand that that will have affected me and may affect me the rest of my life, now I know where to watch out for that. So now when I'm, on that edge of success and I'm so tempted to say, no, forget it, I'm gonna go do something else, is to stay in that and just keep pushing against that. It means to really guard relationships. And so growing up, I wanted as many relationships as I could get because that let me know I was worthy. But as I got older, I just thought, man, how about you just scale it back and just have, fewer, stronger connections. And that has worked better for me. Yeah, and it was just identifying things, that may trigger me and understanding why they're triggering me and working through that. That has become really helpful for me. Yeah, and I swear my wife could write a book about just trying to deal with an adoptee and all the stuff that we come into the relationships with. Yeah, I have a good friend, high school friend I grew up with. He was also adopted. And we never talked about that in high school, which was interesting. But now we talk about it all the time. And he came to see me speak once. And I had mentioned, how adoption has affected how I look at relationships. And man, he came up to me after that meeting with tears in his eyes. And he said, man, I'm going to share that with my wife because I think that'll mean a lot to her. Because man, I did a lot of the stupid stuff you did and she couldn't figure out why I was doing it. And now just to give some definition to that, I think that's just going to really help us. And so, yeah, I just think identifying what those triggers are for us and fighting against them, not to let them take control at times.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Naming it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, we're getting close to that time. And before we move into closing comments, Kevin, would you mind, you've got your book handy, would you mind holding up your book and show us the cover of your book? And Jennifer, I know you put that link, you put the link in the chat bar. Could you put that out one more time for everyone? And I can't read that far away.
Oh,
again, so
the name of the book.
There we go. Growing Up
Black in White. And it's on Amazon Kindle. I did the audio version last year. That's on there. And the website is the same, growingupblackandwhite.com.
And where can we find you online? I found we spoke on LinkedIn. You're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram.
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter are all the same. It's Kev Inclusion. So it's KEVINCLUSION.
Great. Your story is so inspirational, and I think I speak for all of us here tonight. We really appreciate you coming on this evening, sharing your personal journey and all the work that you're doing out there for all the adoptees. We thank you.
No, this is amazing. I might have to drop in the next one.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
At this time, I'd like to turn it back to Pam for a closing comment.
Hey guys, something you said, Kevin, which first of all, we're so glad you came on and we hope you do come back and you can sit back and relax. You don't have to,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you don't have to talk. Well, you can talk, but yeah. You don't have to speak the whole time.
Right.
But when you said something about, finding, like a safe place to go, and just say what you felt, I think that's exactly the way, like all of us as adoptees feel. We need a place to go. We always want that safe place, whether it's conferences or it's our happy hour. I think we're always looking for, our friends and our people. And that's what I think, I don't know, I always use the word peep, and my kids think that's hilarious. I mean, they're grown adults, they're boys, and I'm like, you know what, guys, get out of here. But they're smart Alex. But I always think that that's a big thing for us, and always finding a place to come and share our stories. And it's a place where we all get it. And there's no better place than adoptees that get it. So that's what we hope we do here on Friday nights. And I think moms get it, adoptees get it. So I hope everyone, tonight got it and and enjoyed Kevin's story. I sure did. And yeah, we're glad everybody joined us tonight. So
Thanks, Pam.
Yeah.
And next week's guest, here we go.
It is.
We got the,
yep, there it is.
The one and only David
One
Ball.
and only. He's on here tonight. I think, is he still on here? Are you still on?
I am. Hi, Pam.
Oh, there he is.
Yay.
Yeah, he used to help host us the beginning ones. So yeah, so he'll be joining us next Friday night, and we'll be glad to hear from him, and he'll tell us all about his childhood, and I'm excited to hear about all that. So I don't know if I've heard all of your story. I mean, I've read a lot of your book, but I don't think everybody else has gotten to hear it. So it'll be nice to have you tell us all that.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
I'm
Thanks,
glad.
David.
Right.
Okay, it's a wrap. Thank you,
Wrap.
everybody, for tonight. Have
Thank
a good
you.
weekend.
Yeah.
Stay safe.
All right, take care.
Have a good weekend, you guys.
Kevin, stay on for just 1 second.